Hey there, I am back with another deck review, and today we're going to be looking at Galaxia from Thirdway Industries. I'm a huge fan of Giovanni Moroni and the lore that he puts into all of his decks. And Galaxia really takes that to another level. A lot of his earlier decks are built around established mythologies like Greek and Roman mythology, but in some of his later decks, he's really starting to build out his own world and his own set of stories that he puts into his decks. And I am a huge fan of it. Galaxia really takes that to another level. In fact, not only do we get lore in the decks themselves, but there's an entire novella that was written by Liz Romerl that tells even more of the story and kind of exposes you to more details that really just bring even more life to the decks themselves. So if you get the decks, definitely recommend checking those out. But let's get into some of the lore of these decks and what they're all about, what really makes them special. Now, Galaxia, interestingly enough, is actually a bit of a sequel. It's a sequel to this deck from 2019, the Order deck. Now, the Order was a group, basically a dystopian group that exerted control over every aspect of people's lives. They ruled Earth completely, and a lot of the story is really built around the struggle between these two. The King of Spades, this is the mysterious and all-powerful leader of the Order who rules with an iron fist. And this is the Betrayer. He was a former high-ranking member of the Order and one who led the revolution that fought against the Order and sought to overthrow them. Now, as the story of the Order decks closed and we kind of pass the time between the Order and Galaxia, the battle rages on between these two. But essentially, because he's a high-ranking former member of the Order, the Betrayer is able to actually use his knowledge of the Order and even some of their technologies to start to win the battle. And so he's starting to destroy some of the cities. His revolution is growing and growing. And out of fear, the Order decides to form what's called the Galaxia Initiative. They kind of rebrand themselves as the Galactic Federation. And the Galaxia Initiative is basically this idea that they're going to form some spaceships, take humanity out to a new planet that they've discovered called Terra 2, and there they'll reform their society and reestablish their control free from the battle of the Betrayer. And so they form the Galaxia Initiative, and that's where the new decks come into play. And so just like the Order, they use playing card decks almost as a form of propaganda. And so the decks that you see here, Promessa and Altezza, are two of their primary propaganda decks that they use for society. Now, these aren't the only two decks in the series. There's actually 3 more. You can see these here. We'll get a chance to talk about all 5 of the decks, but let's start out with the decks that the Order themselves released to the citizenry, Promessa and Altezza. Let's start out, though, with Promessa. Now, Promessa is the name of the ship that was created to bear the citizens out to Terra 2. And so they used this deck to kind of promote the idea of that journey, them taking that hundreds of years long journey to make their way to Terra 2. The tuck case is just a standard glossy finish tuck case. You'll see this on some Thirdway decks. I'm a big fan of the ones that are a lot fancier, have the embossing and the foiling on them. But what really sets this one apart is the color scheme. Brilliant yellow color, really stands out on any shelf, and I think it just looks great with that color scheme. It has a very familiar feel to it overall if you've seen other Thirdway Industries decks. That you have the name of the deck across the top, large design elements at the bottom, and then lots of line work and design work all the way through. Whole thing's given kind of an outer space futuristic feel to it. The line work almost looks like a circuitry and a computer chip. And at the bottom here, you get the Galactic Federation symbol, that triangle with the circle in the middle, and small view of Terra 2 off in the distance. On the side, you get Galaxia on both sides, ad copy for Thirdway Industries and USPCC, who printed the deck on the bottom. Top just has 4 simple pips, a few more design elements, and the back is a view of the back design of the cards. We'll look more at that in a second. As you open up the inner flap, another view of the Galactic Federation symbol, as well as on the smaller inner flaps, and nothing printed on the interior of the tuck. So that's the tuck case, but we want to see the cards, so let's get into it and start with the back design. All right, these very similarly use that brilliant yellow color scheme, and I am a huge fan of it. I love the color on these. Very bright, vibrant feel to them overall. That same line work, very angular and sharp lines all the way through, just like we saw on the tuck case. Forms a really great pattern overall. Galactic Federation symbol in the top and the bottom with Terra 2 in the middle as well. And then finishes out with that thin yellow poker border. So great look to the back design of the cards, kind of has that classic feel, but still very, very fitting with the theme overall. Now, just like in Order, the ad cards are sort of used as a bit of propaganda ads. You know, you can imagine these almost as like posters that would be hung out in the city by the Galactic Federation. The first one, of course, is an ad for the Galactic Federation themselves. And so you have the leader of the galaxy, who, not coincidentally, is also the leader of the Order, so one and the same. This time looking almost benevolent with a large cloak, a staff in hand, and that proud bearing that he's got there. So love the look of those. Love that sort of three-quarter body view. Very, very cool look with that one-way ad card. So those are definitely a highlight of the Order decks, and I'm glad they make their return for Galaxia. Next one is an ad for Terra 2 itself, Space Eden, definitely evoking Garden of Eden Garden of Eden themes all the way through, complete with kind of a representation of Adam and Eve as the first settlers of the Space Eden. The apple there, definitely kind of driving that imagery home. And the peaceful scene all around them with wheat and flowers growing, bees buzzing in the air. Just a very serene look. Who wouldn't want to go to Space Eden? All right, next one. Obviously, there's going to be some dangers in space travel, and fear is a great way to control the populace. So we get the beware of alien mind control, one of the many dangers that you may encounter as we go through space. And one of the things that you may lean on the Galactic Federation to help protect you. And last but not least, obviously with a complex piece of machinery like the Promessa, you're gonna need something to help maintain it, and why not use technology? So we have an ad here for the Tetrabot 9000, that multi-armed robot in the center. Very cool, love the ad cards on these, absolute highlight for the deck overall. All right, now into the aces, and we start out with the Power Ace, the Ace of Spades, all built around the Promessa itself, that blue ship with that almost axe head tip to it. And that sort of forms the bottom of your Spade Pip, the starry sky forming the top half. Love the look of this overall. You get Terra 2 off in the distance as well. And then nice yellow border that gives it a nice little framing, custom font, and a fairly standard looking pip there as the Pippin index in the corner. No words on this one, which big fan of that, like it just being the imagery in the picture. Other three aces are a little bit more reserved, just feature a custom pip there, a little bit of a glowing pip, and then in a sea of stars with the planet in the background. Interesting use of the borders on these. You'll notice the two red cards don't have the same color border. So one has yellow, the other one has this sort of North Carolina blue color, and then same thing on the black cards. So the black cards don't have the same border, and the red cards don't have the same border. Instead, you get one black card and one red card with each border, if that makes sense. So there's your four aces. Nice look to them overall. Number cards are not anything too out of the ordinary. Fairly standard layout on these. You'll see the pips, a little bit of a custom shape, and they are given that border, that outline that gives them a little bit of a glow overall. They do get the custom borders, but otherwise pretty standard layout. Nice, easily functional cards as you go through these. So there's your diamonds with that blue border around them. So just small embellishments, but pretty standard layout. The clubs, it's probably my favorite shaped pip, the most custom pip of them all. And then into the hearts, a little bit of an elongated look and that yellow glow around them. So there are your number cards, and then we get into the quartz. And just like with any Thirdway deck, this is really where the lore of the deck starts to come to life. And we start with the clubs. Of course, these are the passengers of the long journey, the citizenry who the Order or the Galactic Federation wants to encourage to come along with them on the journey. Now, it is hundreds of years to make your way out to Terra 2, and so, of course, they're going to have to go into cryosleep for some or all of the journey. And so you can see, particularly in the Jack and the Queen here, they're off in cryosleep, the tanks off on their sides, and that peaceful, serene look as they almost pass the journey in almost an instant, and they make their way to Terra 2. And then scientists who help kind of maintain that machinery, make sure everybody stays alive, and so the King of Clubs represents one of them. So some of the many passengers that make their way on this long journey. But very familiar look. Love the look of these court cards. Definitely classic art style for Giovanni Moroni. If you've seen his other deck, you'll be familiar with his art style. It's immediately recognizable. By the way, the Jack of Clubs here, this is sort of the main character. I mentioned that novella written by Liz Romeril. This is a bit of the main character. His name is Jax, and he features very heavily in her story. So definitely recommend checking that out. It's a great story. All right, then we get into the heart. So of course, in order to make sure that it's a comfortable flight, you're gonna need a spaceship crew, and so they get their feature on the hearts. Basically the hospitality staff of the Promessa, there to see to anyone's needs during that long flight to Terra 2. My favorite one here is definitely the Queen of Hearts. Has that very classic flight attendant look, very typical flight attendant uniform, complete with a little pointed hat. So some of them very much that hostess style, others much more technological, but all of them there to make sure it's a comfortable journey for everyone. And then it is a very complex piece of machinery, and so you will also need to make sure that you have the appropriate maintenance, those scientists and engineers and other specialists who help keep the Promessa operational throughout the trip. And so they get their own feature as well on the diamonds. Great look to them. Jack of Diamonds, another one of my favorite cards in this one. It's just that retro future visor that he's got there that really sort of makes the card for me. So there's your maintenance workers and some of the crew. And finally, we get the Spades. So one of those ad cards warned about aliens and other dangers that you might encounter. But don't worry at all. The Galactic Federation has provided their elite force, their security force, to help protect citizens from any threat they may encounter. Noble heroes there, worthy of any comic book. I particularly love the Queen of Spades here. You'll see that very classic ray gun that you might find on the cover of any old space comic book from the 1950s. Love that sort of pseudo vintage style to them. So there's your Spades. And that is the Promessa deck, but that was only one of the two propaganda decks that were created by the Galactic Federation. Not only did they want to celebrate the journey and how comfortable the journey would be, but they also wanted to celebrate the new life that they were going to create. And so the second deck, Altezza, is a celebration of the first human outpost that will be created on Terra 2. The city itself is actually constructed from the Promessa ship. As the ship landed, they would reconfigure the ship, and it would become the first set of buildings on the human outpost Altezza. Now the tuck case itself, very similar look and feel to Promessa. A lot of similarities, but basically the same design between the two. Definitely, clearly you get the different name of the deck, some very, very slight differences. Most notably though, you get a completely different color scheme. This one done in a brilliant aqua or teal color. Love the color scheme on this one. That aqua and the yellow mix great together. I like the yellow. I think this one looks even better to me. Just a really unique look to it overall. But no differences as we look through the design. These also printed by USPCC, so know what to expect with those. And then we get into the cards themselves. Now, while the tuck cases are extremely similar, there are a lot of differences on the cards themselves. It's something that Giovanni always does, creates completely different decks as we go from one to the next. Did that here as well. Now the back design does feature the same overall back design, same design elements, but obviously color swap to that brilliant, bright teal color. That mixed with the yellow, absolutely great on this back design. But basically the same design elements as Promessa. You do get a completely new set of 4 ad cards on these. First one is an ad, obviously, for Terra 2 itself, a new home. You can see someone very peacefully greeting you to this royal looking city in the background. And you can see it rising up there in that bright yellow sky. Now I will say one small knock on this one, and you'll see it on a few of the other cards. Wherever he does this with the white design against a yellow background, it definitely doesn't have as much contrast as I would have liked. So in some lights, depending on how you look at this, it can be really hard to make out some of the details. Like, you have to look really closely to see like the planets or the stars in the background. Definitely fades in a little bit. I think that maybe a darker yellow would have helped a little bit with that, but still a fun look to these ad cards overall. All right, next one for your sustenance, the Forza protein bar, these meal replacement bars that of course are the only way to power the people on their long journey. So obviously they're fans over there, and you see the protein bar there in the front. So love the little ads that are run on these. Rebel Chronicles, this is for kind of a book or a magazine series that everybody likes to read. Obviously filled with propaganda from the Order or from the Galactic Federation as well, but two of the classic characters from the Chronicles. And last but not least, an ad for Kill the Monster, Join the Protectors. The Protectors, those members of the Galactic Federation who help protect the other citizenry from the dangers they may face. So an ad to maybe join up with that military force if you want to help as well. So cool looks of the ad cards, just like before. Ace of Spades also gets a little bit of a facelift this time, whereas the Ace of Spades on Promessa featured Promessa. This one features Alteza, so now it's been reconfigured into the skyline of the grand city that's been formed. Beautiful Spade Pip shape once again. The other three aces, as well as the number cards, have a very similar look, almost identical, or if not completely identical, to what we saw in Promessa. So not going to spend too much time on those. You've seen those before. No differences on these compared to Promessa overall. But as we speed ahead to the court cards, we will get a completely different set of court cards and telling yet another aspect of the lore of Galaxia. So this time we've made our way to Alteza. And so what's the first thing we need? Well, we're going to need a Federation army to help defend Alteza, to protect Alteza from the dangers that it may face. And so here we have three of the elite forces. The Federation army itself, the Galactic Federation, has ground troopers, assassins, and defenders, just some of the types of troops that are responsible for protecting Alteza. And they all have with them some super powerful weapons, these menacing looking guns, or there's a really powerful, almost a rocket launcher there. But the one I really like is this Thunder Saber. Almost looks like a lightsaber that the assassin here in the Queen of Spades is carrying. It's a super powerful sword that's capable of killing even the gods. So there's the menacing but strong looking Federation army. Then as we get into the diamonds, we get a look at the colony support. So these are some of the engineers that are responsible for helping to perfect the planet through technology. So you get classic scientist look there. Some of them more engineers. This guy almost looks like he has a jetpack on. But just some of the many people who help to ensure that Alteza is going to be a wonderful place for everybody to live. You also need to have some form of support. The different workers who help to maintain the city. And so the clubs are a celebration of them. Some of them very much classic maintenance workers, like here with the drill in his hands, that great retro visor on. Others help to grow the food that everybody's going to eat. And so this one of my favorite cards in the deck. Love that sort of peaceful look, growing wheat and flowers in the background. That's a really cool one. So there's a celebration of some of the workers. And finally, we have the royal family. So the Order selected a new king and of course his family, who were to become the first rulers on Alteza and their new galactic outpost. And so there's the powerful king himself, that benevolent ruler who helped to guide the citizenry as they made their way to Alteza. And of course, his wife, the queen, and his son, the Jack. Very kind of powerful, noble, regal look to these overall. So the only actual royalty that we see in the royalty of these decks. So there's your leaders if you choose to make your way to Alteza. And that is the second deck. So we've gotten a chance to see the overt propaganda that the that the Order of the Galactic Federation put forth in Promessa and Altezza, but what did they have in store with the other decks? Well, let's put these aside and find out. Now, you may remember that at the beginning I said that they form two different ships. We talked about Promessa, but we haven't talked about their second ship, Domina. This was the much more luxurious ship. This was the elite ship, if you will. This is the one that, and this deck basically reveals the true nature. So this is where the Galactic Federation members themselves would travel. Much more luxurious ship, and instead of going into cryo sleep, all of the members were given access to drugs and elixirs that would help lengthen their lives so that they could actually stay awake and enjoy the luxury of the Domina for their trip. Now, interestingly, there's two different decks for Domina. This deck over here is basically an overrun deck for Domina. This is something that Giovanni's done fairly frequently on a few of his other decks for Kickstarter. When he does his more luxury deck, like the Domina deck, he does an overrun deck, prints a few extra with Integra. Now, both of these are more limited than the Promessa and Altezza decks that we looked at. There's about 2,500 of each of these printed. Domina is a bit more limited at 1,888. And then Integra, which features the exact same cards but a much simpler tuck case, is actually the most limited version. There's only less than 500 of these available. But these two are the more luxury decks of the series, or specifically Domina is. So let's talk a little bit about them. All right, so Domina is done on a very different, this one's tuck case is actually put together by Gambler's Warehouse. It's given a soft touch feel and has this matte yellow foil all the way around. It's a really cool look and feel to the deck overall, and has a great feel as you kind of run your fingers across it. That embossing on here really kind of gives it a little bit of extra luxury to it overall. Now, the color of that matte foil, that yellow that you see here, actually not as bright as was initially intended. Initially, this was supposed to be a much brighter color, much more similar to the yellow that you see on Promessa, but due to some difficulties in the printing process, ended up with a much more muted look, almost this mustard yellow color. I would have liked it with a little bit brighter of a color, but I still think that this one, if you get this in hand, does still have a great look to it overall. Now, very similar look and feel in terms of the design elements to what we've seen before, but a little bit more monochromatic of a color scheme. Just that yellow against that deep black. Little teeny tiny hits of red here, like the Terra 2 down there is done in red, along with the spaceship at the bottom, also done in red. But overall, very similar design elements, just embellished with the embossing overall. So as you turn all the way through, no differences all the way around. You will notice, of course, the postage stamp style seal featuring the logo of the Galactic Federation, and these are numbers. I got number 379 out of the 1888 deck run. Now, did mention the cards on this one and the much simpler Integra deck are the same. So I only opened the Integra version of the deck and left my Domina deck sealed just so I can still see the cards overall. So Integra, much simpler, just done with a red on black color scheme. Great color scheme overall, but that simpler, just glossy finish tuck case. But let's get to the cards and see what the luxury of Domina has in store for us. So let's get some of these put aside and step our way into Domina. We'll start with the back design. Now, I love the colored scheme of this back design. This is probably my favorite of them. That black card with the bright yellow, little tiny hits of red in there. Same design elements that we saw before, but just given a really kind of aggressive look and feel to this overall. I'm a huge fan of this color scheme. So great look to the back design. We get a new set of ad cards. Now remember, these were more intended for the elite. And so first of all, we get a look at SSC Domina First Class. So this is the more luxury flying experience. There's your hostesses, complete with the elixir, maybe that elixir that'll help lengthen your life in their hands as well. And the big, bold Domina ship there at the top. So prepare yourself for that exciting journey. Obviously, you get a chance to discover the galaxy. So there's one of the brave explorers making their way through. If you go on this one, you get to stay awake. So unlike the citizenry that has to go into cryo sleep, you get to stay awake and enjoy the luxury, and the scientists will help you out with the elixirs to help lengthen your life. And finally, a little bit of a warning for the betrayer from Earth. Never forget. So obviously, the Order is having to flee basically from the betrayer. And so we get one last sort of dig at the betrayer here. And obviously the same imagery that we saw from the Order deck. Now, if you've seen before, this guy may look a little bit familiar to you. This is actually loosely based off of Giovanni Moroni himself. So he often kind of works his own image into some of the cards in here, and he made himself basically the betrayer. You'll always recognize him with that sort of spiky hair and a little bit of a scar across his forehead, sort of hallmark. So if you pay attention to some of his other decks, you may spot Giovanni in a couple of the other decks as well. But very cool set of ad cards. The cards themselves are done against a yellow background, brilliant bright color, matches great with that yellow and black back design. The Spade Pip on the Ace of Spades kind of follows suit with what we saw on the other couple of decks, this time featuring a look at the Domina ship there in red as the base of that Spade Pip. Once again, this kind of suffers from that same issue that you saw on one of the ad cards in the previous deck. The white design elements against the yellow, some of those thinner lines, they kind of get lost here, and you kind of see that a little bit at the top or down here in the exhaust of the Domina. A little bit of it gets lost and just harder to see some of those finer design elements. They get a little bit lost. It's a little bit of a shame, but when you get this up close and in the right light, it's a really brilliant, fun look to it overall. So similar design overall on these. These all just have that white border against the yellow. Brilliant, bright, shiny look to these. Nothing too special on the number cards, just like before. This time they're all done with a white border. So little embellishments with otherwise fairly standard pips against that bright, bright yellow background. And naturally, third deck, we're gonna get a third set of court cards. Now, because this was the deck of the elites, so to speak, these are gonna feature a much sort of darker, more sinister feel to the court cards overall, and that starts with the Spades. So the Spades represent control, and here we see that defense force, that Federation army that we were introduced to before, they're actually just there for their true purpose. They exist just to eliminate threats to the Federation. So you can see them much more menacing look compared to the more benevolent Federation members that we saw before. Here in particular, that brutal assassin with the sword behind him. Once again, you suffer a little bit from those design elements in white in the back, getting a little bit lost, but the brilliant, vibrant color of the characters themselves, the police forces and other Federation members just really pops on that yellow card. Then we get into the diamonds. The diamonds represent pleasure, so some of the different pleasures and entertainment that you can expect on the flight on the Domina, including one of the most famous people in all of the Federation. This is a guy by the name of The Voice. Basically, he runs the radio broadcast filled with propaganda, but he is sort of the leader of that broadcast. So very familiar to everybody, both Federation and citizen alike. And a couple of others, the Queen and King, kind of living in luxury, drinking or smoking as they make their flight. Now onto the clubs. We get another look here. These are the production. So we saw these same characters before in a previous deck, but now we see them kind of exposed not just as workers, but almost as slaves. In fact, you can see the little barcode on the chest here of the Jack of Clubs. These are all humans who have been technologically enhanced in some way and are forced to work and serve the Federation basically eternally. So not necessarily volunteer workers, but instead those who were sort of pressed into service. And you can see the sort of biological enhancements that they all have, the robotic arms and everything. They've basically been turned into cyborgs just intended for work. And with the hearts, we get a much more sinister look at the royal family. Before they had a more benevolent look, but now that hit of red and black on their clothes really gives them the much darker look. The red or the yellow eyes glowing. Definitely a much harsher group of leaders than we saw before. And of course, their power is absolute. So the king and queen, it turns out, were elected by the order themselves and eventually are there to become basically dictators on the new planet. So there are the last three court cards. So brilliant look to these overall. This, despite the issues of that white on yellow, probably my favorite of the decks overall. But we are 4 decks in and we're not done yet. So we've seen all the different decks, but Giovanni did close out with one final deck, Superba. This is the gilded version of the deck, the most luxurious and rarest version of the deck overall. There's 888 of these printed. Similar design elements once again, but now done with brilliant black foil on a black matte tuck case, embossing all the way through, and you see that brilliant shine overall. Really luxurious feel of this one. Those tiny hits of red just really set off against that black, and finishes out with another postage stamp style brilliant red seal. Just a great feel to this one overall. Lots of mystery, and as you open up the tuck case, you're treated to some brilliant gilding as well. So you may notice the name Superba sounds very similar to one of the most desirable decks from Thirdway Industries, the Suprema deck from his Omnia series, and the color scheme on these is very much like Suprema as well. That red and black, similar notes to the design overall, but that black and red, just such an aggressive look, and just embellished that much more with that shimmering red foiled edges. That gilding is brilliant. If you hit it in the right light, it almost has a little bit of a shimmer to it. Now, I will say it is susceptible to a little bit of chipping. This didn't come like this, but I actually got these little chips as I kind of pulled the deck out of the tuck case and put it back in a couple of times. So be careful with it if you do that, but still a brilliant look to that foil overall, or the gilding overall. The cards themselves do feature only 2. So these were printed by Expert, whereas the others were printed by USPCC. So we only get 2 extra cards. One of them, a very sort of dystopian control card. And then the royal family looking especially dark there on the other ad card. And then as we go through, we'll see similar looks to what we saw on the deck before, but all given this much darker and more sinister overtones with that black background. So you get yellow and reds, all very, very vibrant against that background. And we get a new set of core cards as well. With the core cards, these are going to be familiar if we saw some of the previous ones. So some of the same characters, but given a little bit of a different design to set them apart from the previous decks. So here we see some of that Federation Army, those defense forces, some of the workers featured on the diamonds, and then the clubs, more of those colony workers. There's my favorite, that Queen of Clubs, great card. And then finally, some of the staff that helped on the flights themselves. So great look to this one. That gilding just looks absolutely brilliant. Another great deck. It's definitely a lot of decks on this one, but as you can see, lots of variation as you go from one deck to another. Definitely don't have to pick up all the decks, but I highly recommend picking up at least one for yourself. Great set of decks. Definitely a longer video, but there's a lot of lore to get through with Galaxia. So hope you enjoyed this nice in-depth look at the Galaxia series from Thirdway Industries. I'll put a link down in the description where you can pick up any of these decks for yourself. They're still available on Thirdway's website. So go grab one if you weren't already a backer of the campaign. But hope you enjoyed. And hey, make sure to subscribe for more deck reviews, more unboxings. Let me know what else you want to see, and I'll see you for the next one.